World War I was once called the war to end all wars, a conflict so devastating that humanity believed it would never willingly step into such destruction again. That belief did not survive the century. Instead, the First World War reshaped the modern world, destroyed empires that had stood for hundreds of years, and introduced a scale of violence that permanently altered how nations viewed power, security, and war itself. To understand how such a catastrophe began, it is not enough to point to a single assassination or a single decision. The war was the result of decades of tension, fear, ambition, and miscalculation slowly building beneath the surface of European politics, until the entire system collapsed. At the dawn of the 20th century, Europe appeared outwardly stable. The great powers had avoided a major war for decades. Trade flourished, and diplomacy created the illusion of balance. Beneath that surface, however, the continent was under immense strain. Industrialization had transformed societies faster than political institutions could adapt. Factories produced weapons in unprecedented quantities. Railways allowed entire armies to mobilize in days rather than months. Military planning became rigid and automated, leaving little room for hesitation once a crisis began. At the same time, nationalism intensified, convincing populations that their nation's survival depended on strength, expansion, and prestige rather than compromise. Germany stood at the center of this unstable balance. Unified only in the late 19th century, it rose with extraordinary speed. Its economy expanded rapidly, its industrial output rivaled Britain's, and its military doctrine emphasized discipline, speed, and decisive action. Many German leaders believed their nation had a narrow window of opportunity to secure dominance in Europe before rivals caught up. Britain, long the world's foremost naval and economic power, watched Germany's rise with growing unease. German shipbuilding threatened Britain's control of the seas, while German industry challenged its financial dominance. France, still scarred by its defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, remained determined to reclaim lost territory and restore national pride. Russia, vast but politically fragile, sought influence abroad to compensate for internal instability and assert itself as a great power. Rather than easing these rivalries, diplomacy hardened them through rigid alliance systems. European leaders believed alliances would preserve peace by deterring aggression. But in practice, they removed flexibility and multiplied risk. Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy aligned under the Triple Alliance, while Britain, France, and Russia formed the Triple Entente. These agreements were often vague, secretive, and built on assumptions rather than clarity. Once activated, they forced nations to act according to obligation rather than circumstance. A crisis involving one state could now trigger a chain reaction involving them all. The most volatile region within this system was the Balkans. The decline of the Ottoman Empire left a power vacuum that nationalist movements rushed to fill. Serbia, energized by victories in the Balkan Wars, sought to unite Slavic peoples into a single nation. Austria-Hungary, a fragile multi-ethnic empire already struggling to hold itself together, viewed Serbian nationalism as an existential threat. If Slavic identity spread within its borders, the empire itself could collapse. Russia supported Serbia both out of cultural affinity and strategic interest, seeing the Balkans as a gateway to greater influence. The region became a powder keg where imperial decline, nationalism, and great power rivalry collided. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary visited Sarajevo. His presence symbolized imperial authority in a region deeply hostile to it. A small group of Serbian nationalists believed his assassination would weaken Austria-Hungary and advance their cause. When Gavrilo Princip fired the fatal shots that killed the Archduke and his wife, the act shocked Europe. But it did not shock Europe into restraint. Instead, it provided leaders with a justification they had already prepared themselves to use. Austria-Hungary treated the assassination not merely as a criminal act, but as a political opportunity. Backed by Germany, it chose confrontation over diplomacy. Rather than seeking international mediation, Austria-Hungary issued Serbia an ultimatum deliberately designed to be unacceptable. The demands violated Serbian sovereignty and were delivered with a deadline that allowed almost no room for negotiation. Serbia accepted most of the terms, signaling a desire to avoid war, but rejected those that crossed a clear line. Austria-Hungary declared war anyway. The decision was not forced, it was chosen. Germany's role was decisive. German leaders issued Austria-Hungary a blank check, promising unconditional support regardless of the consequences. They believed war was inevitable and that delaying it would only weaken Germany's strategic position. Surrounded by rivals and fearful of encirclement by France and Russia, German strategists viewed early war as preferable to later war. Diplomacy, in their view, was not a path to stability, but a delay that benefited their enemies. War was seen as a tool to reshape the international order while Germany still held the advantage. Russia now faced a critical choice: allow Serbia to be crushed and lose influence in the Balkans, or intervene and risk escalation. Russian leaders chose mobilization. This decision fundamentally altered the situation. Mobilization was massive, slow, and difficult to reverse. It signaled intent and created momentum that diplomacy could no longer easily slow. Germany interpreted Russia's actions as preparation for war and activated its own military plans. Deadlines replaced dialogue and fear replaced trust. Germany declared war on Russia, then on France. To carry out its long-planned strategy quickly, German forces moved through Belgium, violating its neutrality. This single decision transformed a continental conflict into a global one. Britain, bound by treaty and motivated by fear of German dominance in Europe, faced a choice it could no longer avoid. When Britain declared war on Germany, the alliance system fully collapsed into open conflict. Within weeks, nations across Europe and beyond were mobilized for war. What followed was not the short, decisive conflict leaders had imagined. Instead, the war stagnated into brutal stalemate. Trench systems stretched for hundreds of miles. Industrialized killing turned battlefields into zones of constant death. Machine guns, heavy artillery, poison gas, submarines, and aerial bombing inflicted casualties on a scale humanity had never experienced. Soldiers lived for months in mud, filth, and fear, while civilians endured shortages, bombardments, and displacement. The tragedy of World War I lies not only in its destruction, but in its preventability. At every stage, alternative paths existed. Austria-Hungary could have pursued mediation. Germany could have restrained its ally. Russia could have delayed mobilization. Britain could have actively mediated rather than remaining ambiguous. Each decision alone did not doom Europe, but together they created an unstoppable chain reaction. No single nation bears all the blame. Austria-Hungary chose aggression. Germany enabled escalation. Russia mobilized recklessly. France encouraged resistance. Britain avoided early mediation. Each acted according to perceived self-interest, believing that war would secure their future rather than destroy it. They were catastrophically wrong. When the war finally ended in 1918, the world it left behind was shattered. Empires collapsed, borders were redrawn without regard for stability, and unresolved grievances festered beneath the surface. The peace that followed punished some nations while failing to address the deeper causes of conflict. Instead of closure, it produced resentment, instability, and a sense of unfinished business. World War I did not begin because war was unavoidable. It began because restraint was abandoned, diplomacy was weakened, and power was pursued without regard for consequence. It stands as a reminder that history is shaped not by destiny alone, but by decisions made under pressure by those who believe they can control outcomes they barely understand. And just 21 years later, the world would pay the price for those same mistakes once again.